Hello, dobry wieczór, witajmo. My name is Jen Budny, and I am the executive director of the Ukrainian Museum of Canada. And I'm absolutely thrilled to see so many people here on our virtual platform for tonight's lecture by Dr. Larisa Sembaliuk Cheladyn on Ukrainian embroidery in Canada. We are really lucky tonight to be able to hear from a remarkable artist and a professor and a researcher who's so deeply dedicated to preserving our Ukrainian heritage. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that here at the Ukrainian Museum of Canada in Saskatoon, as well as at Larisa's home in Edmonton, we are gathered on Treaty 6 territory, which is a vast geographical area that is rich with history and the heritage of Indigenous peoples. So at the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, we pay our respects to the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dene, and Métis people for whom this land has been home for far, far longer than Ukrainians have been present, indeed for some since time immemorial. Indigenous people have done a great deal to educate Canadians on the importance of preserving cultural traditions in the effort to make people whole. And this is a perspective that many Ukrainian Canadians also share, and Ukrainians everywhere in the diaspora and in the motherland. The Ukrainian Museum of Canada was founded by the Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada in 1936. This was a group of women who really understood how important cultural heritage is for community and for a sense of self. Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada is still one of our strongest supporters, and we're very grateful for their presence. Tonight's lecture is part of our now 88-year-long commitment to celebrating Ukrainian heritage, and it coincides with our exhibition, Threads of Home, Transformations in Ukrainian Domesticity. This is an exhibition of Podushky from our own collection, combined with artifacts and artworks that relate to evolving ideas of home and relations to Ukraine, from artifacts and artworks that are made here in Canada. This exhibition runs until May 11th. So if you're able to get to Saskatoon, please come by and see this show before it's down. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Larisa Sembaliuk Cheladyn. Larisa is a celebrated artist and a professor who has dedicated her career to global engagement through art. She is an expert in Ukrainian Canadian folklore, and she holds the Kule Chair in Ukrainian Ethnography, directing the Kule Folklore Center at the University of Alberta. Her master's thesis, which you can find online, that's where I found it and read it, was titled Stitched Narratives, the Ukrainian Canadian Embroidered Pillow. And it was based on research that she conducted in communities across Canada, more or less from coast to coast. So it's safe to say that if you wanted to learn about Podushky, there is no better person to turn to than Larisa. So welcome, Larisa, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us tonight. I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everybody. And I just saw a glimpse of Daria Tvertolib. I know some of these names and people that are watching tonight. And some of you have heard what I'm going to talk about, and some of you don't know very much about me. And just to share, like Jen said, I'm currently the Kule Chair of Ukrainian Ethnography at the University of Alberta, and wear the hat of director as well of the Folklore Center. I have a background in fine arts. I have a BFA in art and design. And in 2016, after almost a 40-year-long career as an artist, I decided to go back and study Ukrainian folklore, and did complete an MA in studying Ukrainsky podushka, Ukrainian pillows, and then went on and completed a PhD in media and cultural studies, motivated by Steve, who lived on the prairies and became an icon and a Ukrainian Canadian hero back in the 1930s. My research focuses on different aspects of Ukrainian folklore, but I particularly like to, and am inspired by how memories are embodied in our material culture. things we pick up bring back memories from the past or of a special person like our baba or deda, and also on how we visualize our culture. What is it that we do to our homes, how we dress, how we act, those kind of visual things that specifically outline our identity. And I've kind of got my background. I want to share with you a little bit about how I went about moving towards studying something so specific as podushka. As an artist, I was always been fascinated by how an artist picks something up and decides to do something with it. And my baba used to embroider a lot, my baba Sembaliuk, and she wove, and she wrote Easter eggs, pisanke, and the same as my other baba in Regina. She grew up in Hubbard and then moved into Regina, and she too enjoyed the arts. And I wondered what motivated them back then, because it's not like now where you can Google and get a pattern. So I started to look at different things that people have written about textiles in particular. And I came across work by a woman by the name of Beverly Gordon. She wrote a paper called The Fiber of Our Lives, a conceptual framework for looking at textile meaning. And she's a professor, she's retired now, professor of design studies at the University of Wisconsin. And her research was on why textiles matter to us. She found, and she was fascinated by the English language and how it's full of expressions. I'm going to share my screen right now, which I totally forgot to do at the beginning. It's going to be screen 2. And so Beverly found that we use a lot of expressions that connect to textiles, like the fiber of life, or life hangs by a thread, or even in physics, they speak of string theory.
Larisa, just sorry, your screen is not being shared right
It's
now.
not been shared properly? Okay, I will try again. How's that? I see Lindsay, I'm good? Okay. So we've got all these words here. We spin a yarn when we talk about telling a story. And there we have like tonight, we're going to have a thread of conversation. And so Beverly was really fascinated with by this way we include textiles even in the way we speak. Even the internet, it's a net. And so she also found that textiles evoke emotion. So we can be cloaked in fear or in darkness. We can put a spin on ideas or weave spells if you're into magic. And so it's part of our lives. Gordon also understood that it was part of our rites of passage. For many of us, right from birth, from from baptism, we have something pretty we put on a child, or a special blanket, through to when we get married, the rushnek that binds our hands, or right to the death. You've got different kinds of textiles that become involved in each of the rituals throughout our lives. Another person who inspired me was Carol Hunt, and she's another textile researcher, and she wrote a paper called Retracing the Archive, Materializing Memory. And she has a series of quotes, one in particular by Virginia Woolf, who talked about her very first memory was of red and purple flowers on a background of her mother's dress. So, as a child and thinking back to that time, she thinks about a piece of clothing. With So these are examples on the screen now of different examples of rites of passage, from the baptism to when we graduate, we wear something special, performing on stage, right through to many of our festivals. We've got different textiles that become involved. Within the Ukrainian tradition, definitely our performances, this is part of our identity. Fashion and costumes of the Ukrainian dancers from different regions. From our religious background, we've got a lot of things to look at in a church, and I'll show some more examples a little bit later. And home decor, we've got rushniki, we've got podushky, we've got servietki, all these things that have been embroidered and decorate our lives. And so where does this all come from? For us that are Ukrainian Canadian, looking back through history, one of the things, some of you may have seen this map before or something similar to it. The different regions of Ukraine have different patterns and different color schemes that are very significant and identify that area. And you'll find that a lot of it has to do, it was because in the past they worked with what was available. If you came from one particular area of Ukraine and there were certain plants that grew there or certain minerals that were available, then when you went to dye your threads, you dyed them the colors of the materials that were close by that you could use. The same with the kind of fabric. Some wove hemp if they were growing hemp. Others would have linen if they were growing flax, and then still others were the sheepskin coats, which aren't fabric, but they were a way of covering the body, and they were decorated with embroidery. And so what you wore, what your colors were, all came from what was around you. It also became your identity. So if you did travel around the country, you would be able to identify, or people would be able to identify you as to where you came from by the color scheme, the stitch. They may even be able to tell exactly who embroidered it. If that person, if your baba or prababa had a particular style or was known for motifs, that was part of identifying who you were. And this carried on into Canada. We've got many of you I see from the list online know our history, that we've come in waves. Sir Clifford Sifton was the Minister of the Interior, and I'm just going to skip that screen for a second. Really promoted Ukrainians coming to Canada. So the very first ones arrived in 1891, and when you think of the situation that they came to, it was very wild. And I think in terms of, when I think about my great grandparents when they came, I'm third generation here already. What was the situation? This is a slide from Hamburg around 1900. And you can see waiting to get on the ship were people from all different parts of Europe. In the back, right at the back here, you see the Bukovinci that have got sheepskin coats, and it's very indicative of where they're from. And then these women over here, probably from Germany, and everyone's wearing clothing that identifies them. And they come across in that clothing. This slide is from Quebec City at the port in the early 1900s. And you see that they're wearing with clothing that we identify as being Ukrainian from Western Ukraine. And when they got here, when you think of the journey that these people made, they packed their clothes in. All these people had just this little pile of luggage. They're probably wearing several layers. They have been on, probably from Western Ukraine to Hamburg, might have taken them a week or two. They get on a ship and they probably haven't changed their clothes. they get on the ship, it was a 10 to 15 day journey to Halifax, and then you get on a train and you come across the prairies, and you still haven't changed your clothes. And it's no wonder there's been comments that we didn't, my ancestors didn't smell so good. And I'm not surprised. Also, if you were, let's say, a nursing mother, and you've probably got stains all over the front of your blouse, or if you've got a couple of kids who were seasick, that's stained on the other side of your outfit. And when you think about getting here and that's all the clothes you have, you probably switched to whatever was available here right away. You didn't stay looking Ukrainian. And the assimilation or integration happened right at that very point, just because of the natural circumstances of what you were wearing. These are a couple of slides of my family members. These were the Sembaliuks that arrived in 1902. Already, my pradedo was wearing a suit. My baba had a little bit of embroidery. And the next frame, this is my Kosniuk side of the family, my dad's mother's side of the family. Pradedo's already in a suit and tie. Baba stayed a little bit still with the embroidery. And you find that situation because the men, when they came right away, were going out to get jobs and had to blend in to get those jobs. The women on the prairies in particular stayed within their communities, and there wasn't the same kind of pressure to change their styles. Here's another family. Everybody's already in modern clothes. This little girl here is my mother-in-law in Prelate, Saskatchewan, 1915, and you can see her mom is already dressing the style of the day in 1915 in North America. But a lot of the families still kept their clothes and the embroidery and pulled it out for special occasions. There's another couple, several generations wearing the clothing. But there was pressure to change, to, in a sense, modernize. I studied a lot of the cartoons that were illustrated by Jacob Majdanek, and they were all situated in the 1920s, 30s. And this particular one talks about the husband wanting his wife to, look like a real Mises. And you see in the first frame, she's wearing the huska and the embroidered blouse, kind of dumpy looking skirt. He suggests that she not look like a dumb immigrant. And the next third frame, he walks in on her and she's dressed with like to the nines. She's got high heels on, she's putting on lipstick, and he feels that, she's gone a little bit too far. But a lot of the women at that time, late 1920s, you're thinking about Emily Murphy, the famous five, have all got, the women rallied up to become independent, emancipated, and they're wearing these big hats, and Steve's wife is fitting right in. So you've got these first people that have come, and they've got the pressure to change. The other way that they change is in not just consciously taking on the customs of Canada, but also just reacting to human nature. I had the opportunity in 2015, to come across Canada on a train, and these two women were living in Saskatoon. This is Alice and Catherine. Alice is in pink. And they told me about their lives at this time, 2015, they were both 96 years old. And we started talking about embroidery. And these are the pillows that they embroidered in behind them. And I was asking them about some of the traditions I had read about, such as dowries. It was a tradition in Ukraine. So, your podushka, were they part of your dowry? And it wasn't for them at all. And so for some of you who may not be familiar with that, I'm going to skip ahead a few slides. In Ukraine, a dowry was what a woman put together to show off her wealth before she got married. My father took this picture in 1980 outside of Chernivtsi with family, and they were preparing for their daughter to get married. They've got these huge meter by meter square podushka embroidered on the side because they didn't have couches like we have here. They would stack them to show them off. And the bigger the pillow and the more detailed the embroidery was a symbol of wealth, because you had to have had a lot of geese to have gotten the feathers to make those pillows. You have to have had a lot of time in the family for one of them to have woven that fabric, and then also the time to embroider the pillows and electricity, so you've got light to embroider by. So the more pillows you had, the higher the stack, the more symbolic it was of your wealth. Now, Alice and Katie also talked to me about that was not part of their thing at all in Canada. Alice said that she embroidered because she wanted something pretty. And she would do little samples on little pieces of fabric. And one of the main reasons you've got the difference in size between Europe and here is that we didn't have as much fabric available. They would have little tiny pieces maybe left over from sewing some, as Alice explained to me, if they were going to sew something for the house, there'd be a piece of fabric left over, and they would embroider it, or they would practice different stitches on it, and it would become a small pillow on the back. I asked her once, where did you get your pillows? Where did you get your patterns? And she responded to me, like I asked, David distale zvirats, mabut vid Boga, maybe from God. And it was sort of the thing that made me think about, and I'll talk about a little bit later, where did they get their patterns from? She felt that it just came to her intuitively. She didn't look up what region something was, or whether it was something in the family. She embroidered because she wanted it to look pretty. The other motivation back then for making pillows, besides just sewing it up from a sampler or whatever, in 1927, 28, Cheladyn magazine came out. And I remember my Baba in Regina telling me she and her, my Dido had just gotten married. She was one of the first Canadian women to subscribe to Cheladyn. And there was an issue on June 1928 that had this ad for pillows that you could make for your wife, for a bride. And many, many women that I talked to across Canada told the story of their mothers in about the same era, wanting pillows for their living rooms, just like in Cheladyn, or just like they had seen come from France. And so you're trying to decorate your home like it's being shown in the magazines. Just like we do now, what we see online, we want to try some kind of home decor. So you've got these pillows happening. And if you want to study a little bit more, you can look at the bourgeois pillows that were being made in France at the time. Good Housekeeping had an article on them. So the pillows became a symbol of wealth, and not just ethnic identity, but also of social status, where you fit. If you had these pillows on your on the back of your couch. I think I have a couple of more. This is my prababa's house, and it's about 1960, because I know who this is, and I'm littler on the side. So these were pillows on my prababa's house in the back of the couch. There was also a magazine that came out of Ukraine called Nova Chata. And Savella Stitchician, those of you in Saskatoon would know of Savella Stitchician. She was the, what would you call it? The rep for Nova Chata in Canada. And on one of her journeys, she and Doris Yanda traveled from Saskatoon to New York for a ladies' conference, and then traveled up to Ontario and back across Canada. And the whole time, Sembaliuk was selling subscriptions to this magazine. And so in many of our archives and museums, we've got magazines with people's address labels, like from Innisfree, Alberta, or from North Battleford or whatever pops up. But that's how these women got these magazines. And within them, you'll find all kinds of ideas coming from Western Europe, ended up in these magazines because the Ukrainian designers were studying in Prague and Paris. So again, there's a little article here on Podushky in Nova Chata about the same time. This was 1930. The other thing that was happening on the prairies was that the CPR really wanted to promote movement of population to populate Western Canada. And starting in Toronto, they started these folk song and handicraft festivals. So, and at each of their hotels, the CPR hotels, and so they had it in Toronto, Winnipeg, at the Bessborough in Saskatoon, and in Calgary. And so each of the ethnic groups would come out and put on for a whole weekend an exhibit. And when I go back through some of the archives for these exhibits, the Ukrainians were not much different than if you go to Dauphin Festival or to the Vegreville Festival. We have these mock thatched houses were set up at that time. Everybody was dressed in their best Ukrainian outfits. There were mandolin choirs playing, and this particular photo was in, I believe it was in the Winnipeg Free Press, 1928. And it's the group from the Ukrainian, I guess we would say like pavilion or exhibit right now. This is Saskatoon 1935, Soyuz Ukrainok exhibit of embroidery. And already Ukrainian women were into fundraising. Before we were doing pierogi suppers, we were doing arts and crafts sales. And it was a big thing across the prairies. And you had tablecloths and bluske, the blouses, and all kinds of woven and embroidered pieces were coming out and shown on display how you should be showing them off. So here's another one. It was Edmonton. And do I have another one? No. And the other person who made an impact across Canada and promotion of embroidery and instilling a pride in our folk art was Vasyl Avraменко. He had the Ukrainian dance group, and this was happening right about the same time, 1927. He had a big tour across Canada, stopped in Regina, Saskatoon, all along the train line. This is from here in Edmonton, 1927. He's here in the middle, and just encouraging for everyone to bring out and wear and exhibit their embroidery. So as this was all happening, there were a lot of things that impacted and identified Ukrainian embroidery in Canada that is different than in Ukraine. We had a different history because of where we were living. In some cases, the laws that were established. So there was a loss of connection to the regional patterns amongst in these first two waves, like right up into World War II. They were making things that were pretty. They were making things that were out of whatever materials they had on hand. Initially, they were allowed to grow hemp and make fabric that was the hemp fiber. They were also allowed to make linen from flax. And right around the mid-1930s, hemp became illegal to grow, and it became illegal to ret flax to make linen. Both those things happened within almost 1 year of each other in Canada. And at the same time, in that same really narrow time frame, DMC took out ads in all the ethnic newspapers across Canada, not just Ukrainian. And there were several cotton manufacturers from Texas started to immediately import, so that export to Canada their cotton. And so our community could no longer make our own textile, our own fabric, and we had inundated with ads for the threads, the DMC and Anchor threads, DMC more so than Anchor, billing them as being that they didn't run. They would the color would stay. So you've got all these things happening that really changed the way that our embroidered pieces were made, the process. It was now you would go to a store, buy the fabric, and buy the threads, and you were then limited, or actually your options broadened, because you could buy bigger bolts than could be woven on a home loom, and you had many different colors if you wanted to continue embroidering. And then you also had the cloth, the different weaves. So if you weren't that good or your eyes weren't that great, you could have a bigger weave cloth as opposed to something that was really finely woven. This picture is from Andrew, Alberta, in about the 1950s. Some of you maybe have been familiar with Reverend Luchuk. He and his wife, Dobrodyka Jane, came from the Willingdon area. And Jane's mom, Dobrodyka Jane's mom, had a fabric store in Andrew. The other thing that happened on the prairies is that we had Larisa Sembaliuk, and she was Canada's first Ukrainian Canadian to get her degree in home economics. And she traveled into the prairies, sending into the block communities to teach embroidery classes. She was teaching home ec, just regular home ec in the schools, but in the evenings gravitated to her own community. And then also anybody who came to and stayed at Mohila in Saskatoon would be taught the different stitches. So this is a group that would have gotten together. And there's Savella. Her degree in home economics took her a long way, in that she started to, I just want to check my no. She started all kinds of programs for people to learn some of the old skills. In the early 1950s, like, we know her for having created a cookbook, but Savella also in the 1950s, prior to the cookbook, wrote the first Canadian Ukrainian embroidery book. It was written in Ukrainian language, but she used all the knowledge she had gotten and borrowed the images from Nova Chata and created this book about embroidery. During this same time in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine around Lviv, there was a real surge to promote and to keep up the embroidery traditions. This is a mother-daughter combo. We at the Folklore Center at the U of A ended up with the photo collection of Roman Onofreychuk and his family, and this is, the young girl was his mom, and this was Roman's Baba, and this is them walking on the promenade in Lviv. And our whole collection that we have from the time Lyudmila was born to the time she was 70 years old, living in Winnipeg, Manitoba, she and her mother embroidered details on everything that they wore. We ended up with over 30 different podushka, all in different styles, from this one particular collection. This is the two of them in a displaced persons camp. So they, World War II, moved to Germany. And then, oh, Daria, there's patterns from your family. And so very, very much like several different people I talked to, they had family members in that started to design their own patterns, because when you're traveling during a war, you're not taking books with you. You're taking the necessities. For some of us, maybe your embroidery book is a necessity, but others, it was something like this particular piece here was actually sketched out by Pani Chomiak, who was Laban, and she is Christa Freeland's Baba. And this was in the DP camp on butcher paper. So, and then this was designed by Maria Pochard and in 1948. So they would, like, they had to, it's in them to transfer these patterns. Lyudmila and her mom in the camp sewed most of these costumes for the concert, and the women apparently embroidered them themselves. But the two women made sure that happened. And then also, when these women came to Canada, they started to contribute to the community with their knowledge. Many of them had degrees in certificates. They had many years of studying textiles in Kiev, in Lviv. And they, so you have here Pani Koshitz in Winnipeg, coupled with Mrs. Pavlichenko, who was from Saskatoon, and Mrs. Thetition from Vegreville. The three of them, and I'm sorry, I don't know this woman on the right, but the four of them were invited to be judges at a embroidery competition in Winnipeg in about 1950. So their picture appeared in the paper, and they are the experts now that are starting to share some of the information from the different regions of Ukraine, coming back to like someone like my Baba, who grew up outside of Vegreville. She wasn't aware of when she was young, like a young girl, that her heritage, where it came from, etc. She was just embroidering what was pretty. And that tradition continued. This is about 10 years later from the previous photo. This is in Edmonton, and folk art classes started to spring up across Canada as Pani Koshitz, Pani Pavlichenko, as Savella Stitchery moved across the country. They started to teach classes and inspire other people to teach classes. In this particular case, this is Mrs. Olga Semchuk. When she came from Ukraine, she shared in the Edmonton area what she knew. What I think is really funny is I would never write pisanka with my embroidered blouse on, but it always, those pictures in the newspaper always end up looking like that. The other thing that happened, and this goes back to the fundraising part, along with the craft sales, you would find the fashion shows. And so you would have home decor items like rushnike and the podushka on sale, but you would also have a fashion show showing off how the garments, contemporary styles, had embroidery attached to them. So this is a fashion show from 1949, hosted by Soyuz Ukrainok in Edmonton. And then the tradition continues, and I think, yep, I'm getting close to what I wanted to talk about tonight, specifically. So as I was going across Canada and asking people about where did you get your patterns from? I had lots of stories of how it had to be DMC, which is DMC, because it had to have that it went so that the threads didn't run. They were the best threads. Or that and if you didn't have the right colors, then you could, if you lived in Ontario, you could zip across on a weekend or so and go into the States and pick up what you couldn't get in Canada. But people were very particular about the quality, making sure it was good quality fabric, that it was, and it was in keeping with the trend of the time, where there was, if Canadians, there was a lot of influence from the States already. You're getting into the 60s and 70s of how you decorate your home. And so you've got contemporary ideas, but Ukrainian patterns being put onto them. So I traveled across Canada from in 2015. I started on the train in Edmonton. First stop was Saskatoon, on to Winnipeg, Kingston, Toronto, Montreal, all the way to Halifax. And along the way, many Canadians shared different things. So our regions are as vast and different almost as they are in Ukraine. So in those of us that live on the prairies are very familiar with these some of the prairie patterns and stuff. But when I got to Halifax, one of the women I interviewed, she was very, very proud of her bibs that they wore for Svятий вечір. And I'm going, bibs for Svятий вечір? Well, she goes, oh, yes, because instead of fish of the prairies, I remember we used to have lake fish on the prairies, they had lobster. And everybody got an embroidered lobster bib to wear for Svятий вечір. And I go, oh, wow, we don't have that here. And the other thing that I found really interesting, and I've thought about quite often, is I have this picture up of church in Saskatoon. When I arrived there, Larry Klobuchak said to me, you've got to come and see our church. And I walked in, he says, you can look at and take pictures of any of the pillows, but you can't move them. And what it is that when someone passed away and the family didn't want their podushka, they would donate them to the church. They would be cleaned, they would be restuffed, and people could have a soft pillow to sit on, but they each claim their own. And so I wasn't allowed to mix them up and move them around because you know how we are. We've got our place we sit, and we've got the podushka that we sit on that we've picked. So I took quite a few pictures from the choir loft down, and I don't know if they still continue this tradition. I thought it was very interesting to incorporate it. I also thought it was really interesting that most of these pillows in the church are very bold, bright, and they've even incorporated neon threads, neon colors. Some are Fentex, and it was explained to me that a lot of people felt that this styling of Podushka embroidery was very Russian. And so they didn't want to keep it as a memory of their past. They wanted to stick to the more, like the Hutsul colors, from Halachina, Bukovina, those colors, those patterns, anything that was super floral, they identified with as being Russian. When I returned and started to talk to some of the graduate students at the U of A that were from Ukraine, they asked me why some of my slides for presentations didn't include the pillows from Eastern Ukraine, which were these bold, bright podushka, because in the 1950s, in Eastern Ukraine, you could buy kits, and those kits were some of these really bold, bright colors, and they would be sent to Canada, and it would come with the fabric. It was more like a piece of burlap, and the threads and the pattern, and they were more tradition from Eastern Ukraine. It wasn't that they were Russian. They were created during the Soviet times, that kit, but so I like to make a point now to show many different patterns from all across the country. What else have I got? The other thing that I found that when it came to the podushka, some people actually were very proud. I'm thinking of anyway, that's okay. They would show the inside of the podushka to show how it's almost as good as the outside. So these are two inside pictures that I took. So that this is actually the back side of two different podushka. Something the archivist in me and museum person in me, you notice that these pieces each have a little tag on them. And that's something that we practice at the U of A in the textiles department, is you don't use safety pins to tape a pin on a piece of paper. You give it a number, and then in a spreadsheet, you put all the details, who embroidered it, etc. And this particular piece of fabric is actually interfacing. And you can put interfacing through a printer. And so what they do at the U of A is they have all their numbers on a sheet, they run it through the printer, then cut the numbers off, and they baste it into each of them. So you don't have to worry about a safety pin staining the fabric down the road or ripping some of the fibers. You've got it stitched in, and it's hidden on the inside where people can't see it if they're going to be displaying it. Here's just a few more examples of embroidery fashions over the years. There's in 1976, which is the year I graduated from high school, there was a trend in the Ukrainian community to embroider your grad gown, if there were a lot of you. High school I went to, there weren't very many of us. I did sew my own dress, but I didn't embroider it. Mostly my sister's still listening, she'll know it's because I ran out of time. Anyway, but some very beautiful pieces were embroidered. Dance groups have continued the tradition, but the one other tradition that has happened globally is you have, back in the 50s, your mom or your baba would have hand embroidered your dance costume. And then over the years, we've started to first order them from Ukraine, and now order from Ukraine, and they are machine made, machine embroidery, no longer hand embroidered. And I found, as I've done some of my paintings that many of you might be familiar with, nobody has ever lent me overnight their hand embroidered blouse or costume. When I asked a dance group to lend me some of their costumes, they told me, you can keep them for the whole year because we're not doing that dance till next year. The attachment is so very different to something that was hand embroidered as opposed to something machine embroidered. And that speaks to what I talked about right at the very beginning of the talk, is this connection we have, the memories we have with clothing. And 2 more slides. So unfortunately, I didn't put in my notes. If Daria wants to tell me in chat this lady's name, because she was so interesting. I don't think I can get it. That's okay, Daria, but I met this woman in Toronto. And what is really interesting about this collection of podushka that she put out, every podushka was done with a different stitch or represents a different region. And I spent probably 3 or 4 hours with her because she explained to me what she knew about them, how they were made, where she got the pattern from. Some of them, she said when she was 16, still living in Ukraine, she would copy a pattern off of someone's sleeve of a blouse and then turn it into a podushka. She had, like some artists have a sketchbook, she had a piece of fabric that she would stitch a little pattern or an idea, not necessarily in the right colors, but just so that she would remember what the pattern was. So she was very proud of this collection that she put out. And I have photographed all of them. In my journey across Canada, I started out, and when I got to Saskatoon, several people gave me their podushka. They didn't know what to do with them anymore, and it really didn't fit with their decor in their house. I was on the road for just over a month. By the time people heard I was coming and I got to Halifax, nobody wanted to give me their pillows anymore. I had added value to them, and people had started to think about how they were going to incorporate them into their homes. But I did photograph over close to 700 different podushka my thesis, if you get a chance to go online, has all the photos are in there. They're little tiny squares, but they're there. And it just gives you an idea of how rich this particular folk art is, and how creative the artists were. And when I look back at my original motivation to do a master's, was I had a feeling that this was like a canvas for many people. They didn't have paints, but they had the fabric and they had the threads and were motivated to express themselves visually. And when I discussed it with Andriy Nahachowski, he was my supervisor, Andriy said, well, you know, Larisa, when you do your trip across Canada, you'll probably find about 9 popular patterns. And that'll be it. It'll just be, you know, someone will do one in one color, or somebody else will do it in another color. But basically, there's probably only 9. And as I was going along, it didn't take long for me to figure out that not only were people doing these to express their identity, their Ukrainian identity, but it was also a way of expressing their creativity. And when I think back to Alice Prosyuk, she and Katie were sitting on the bench there. Let me flip back to them. When I asked Alice, you know, звідки зоря дістали, and she said, може від Бога. And then she says, але я завжди додала жовте. I always added yellow. So no matter where she got her idea from, she always added yellow, бо то сонце, because it's the sun. And she expressed herself creatively. Just it was her own thing back then. Anyway, I've taken almost an hour of your time, and if there is time, I'm around to answer questions.